Welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner. I have a returning guest for the first time in 2024, Mr. Garth Ennis. How you doing, mate?
Great, Andrew. Thank you. It's nice to be back.
Yeah, it is nice to have you here, mate, and nice to see you again after a pair of very Merry Christmases. Well, a
Oh,
distant memory now, mate. So, mate, you are. This is a very interesting project to me that you're working on. Something I didn't see coming, but kind of made sense to me when it was announced, which is your all-new James Bond book out from
hmm.
Dynamite. So, how did that come about, mate?
They'd asked me a couple of times before. I'd said no because I had no particular interest in it. At that point, I really only knew the James Bond of the movies.
Yeah,
I see those movies like everybody else. You know, you go
yeah,
and see one every 3 years or so. A week later, I've forgotten half of it, I
yeah,
find, but it
of
was
course.
thoroughly entertaining. But in the interim, I'd actually looked into the Bond of the books. And of course, it was explained to me that the comics run off the character from the books, from the Fleming novels, not the character from the movies, who is a little bit different.
Yeah,
And I think that's where the attraction lay. Once I realized that I would be dealing with the Bond of Fleming's novels, who's a nastier piece of work, a colder, more ruthless, certainly as charming, but ultimately more unsavory character. I found myself on much surer ground, shall we say.
yeah, yeah. I get that, mate. I'm quite the fan of the literary Bond, who is many things, but at the top of that list, um, would be like a narcissist, a snob, and a
Mm,
thoroughly unpleasant piece of work.
yes.
Yeah,
And
and
therefore incredibly entertaining and fun to write about. Yeah.
absolutely right. And one, to hear you say that it all makes so much sense because that's walking straight into your wheelhouse, right? The Bond of the books.
Yes. I mean, we're talking about the establishment's killing machine.
Yeah,
He he's not going to be a model citizen. He's really not. And Fleming seems to accept that from the get-go. No, there are aspects of him that are not pleasant that I do think um you I can see why the charming side of the character was brought in to kind of distract people from that, from the truth of the character. But to me, it adds up to quite an entertaining package. I mean, to give you an idea of the difference, I found myself writing James doing things to people that I realized that in the movies would have been done to him.
yeah,
One of these ghastly things would have been done to James, and it would have been, right, get out of that, hero. Instead, in the comic, because I'm operating off the books, I have him doing things like that to other people. And that to me seems to sum up the difference better than anything else. There's an incident towards the end of issue 3 involving someone in a spacesuit that will illustrate the point quite nicely.
beautifully put, mate, and nicely understated. I think every now and again, the Bond that you're writing, the Bond of the books in the movies, has a glimmer. Has a glimmer. He appears. He appears
Hmm.
quite a lot during the Craig movies because Daniel Craig doesn't really play him as a likable guy, which I've always liked.
Yeah,
And but and if you, I don't know if you remember Doctor No. There's one moment in Doctor No that feels like the literary Bond. It's when this is a deep cut, but it's always stuck in my mind. He kind of just offhandedly kills a scientist who's been shooting at him, and he's almost bored, and he kind of goes, "You've had your six," and he just lifts the gun
right.
up and takes him out, which for a film made then is very unusual, right?
Yeah. The original character does poke through in the films from time to
Yeah,
time. Even in the Moore version, occasionally you will, more than occasionally, you will see some pretty ruthless behavior from James, but it always has to be tempered.
yeah,
I mean, I often think that the Connery version of it is quite interesting because you have this quite ruthless, charming but ruthless secret agent in set against a backdrop of sets that wouldn't be out of place on Doctor Who.
that's
Uh,
right.
you have some
Yeah,
if you look at those films, even though the Connery films have a certain reputation, there's some quite goofy things going on in those films. Then if you bring it right up to date, the Daniel Craig ones, yes, he plays him as unlikable, but in the last couple of films, I think they've tried to demonstrate that of course is not acceptable. This is the age in which toxic masculinity and so on has been identified, and we have to address that, and we have to show James as a terribly, terribly flawed character. The books and the comics, the way I'm writing the character, I think avoids all of that and makes no apologies for what the character is, and we just get on and tell the story. Doesn't mean I'm not interested in exploring who he is, but I don't sort of see the need to temper it in any way.
Yeah, well said, mate. Well said. You mentioned those kind of clunky moments in the flicks. Before we get into your narrative, there's a couple of things. I think some of the things that you really stand out now when you watch them in this day and age. These are films that are lauded, particularly say Goldfinger. Whole sequence where they rob Fort Knox at the end and they knock out all the guards. That plays really rather unusually now when you watch it. I don't. They spray the whole thing with like kind of toxic gas, and all the soldiers kind of all collapse at once, right? But it kind of plays as, it's not intended to be comedy, but it has quite a comic effect. Yeah.
Right.
And that abounds in the movies. I think when you also, I think the thing about the books is they're very simplistic, actually. There's not these weird like global stakes going on all the time. They're more contained tales of espionage, if you will.
Yeah, that's true. Also, the books certainly have villains, but the films turn them into quite grotesque caricatures.
Yeah.
And that's honestly as true of the new ones as it is the old ones. Like the last three Bond movies have really featured variations on the theme of the sort of high-pitched voiced Dr. Evil ripoff that first saw in Skyfall, a film I enjoyed, but I haven't really been able to take the last three Bond villains seriously. That actually leading into my own story, I didn't really feel the need to come up with another cat stroking, one-eyed, funny haircut lunatic,
Yeah.
you know,
Single named individual.
Yeah, in a revolving swivel chair with controls in the
Yeah.
built into the arms. I just didn't feel the need to do that. I actually have James himself make a kind of disparaging remark about characters like that at one point. Um, I feel that the character slots into I hesitate to say the real world, but into a slightly more realistic, more up-to-date setting than a lot of people might think. And so I didn't feel the need to have a silly Bond villain, or too much in the way of grotesquerie, shall we say.
Yeah. No, right on, mate. What's the premise of your tale?
Well, in the story, which is called Your Cold, Cold Heart, a top secret compound is stolen from the Porton Down biological warfare labs in the south of England. It's called Stalvoda. It's essentially weaponized water. It's a weapon of mass destruction that once used, and once its victims have been, once they've suffered what they suffer, after that, the effects are absolutely undetectable. So you could use this thing and half an hour later, you just have a lot of corpses and no sign of what did the job whatsoever. In other words, it's the answer to that old military problem. How do you get rid of enemy personnel without damaging the infrastructure that you're attacking to gain control of in the first place? That's what Stalvoda is. That's what James finds himself on the trail of.
And that feels to me like a perfect setup. How many issues have you got for the story?
It's six.
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 Yeah, nice. And will you be six and done with Bond, or is it something you could come back to?
I could see myself coming back to it if this one goes over well enough. If the publisher's happy enough with the results, I could see myself coming back for more at some point. A highly enjoyable character to write. It's just a question of making sure you've got a good enough story each
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And the beauty of an archetype like Bond is you can wait for that story to come to you, and then you
Yeah,
can
of
always
course.
go back to him, right? Yeah. And is there something you can put into words about what's truly enjoyable about writing that specific character?
I think it's someone who does the sort of dreadful things that a lot of my characters do, but with a certain sense of style, a certain sort of offhand attitude to the whole thing. At one point, M and Moneypenny have a discussion about Bond, in which I tried to, and I sometimes do this with characters, but where they try to sort of boil down into one sentence what Bond is. I think that's around issue 5, and you'll see it when you read it. But M's conclusion is pretty much mine as to
Right on.
and to what the attraction of writing the character is too.
Brilliant, mate. Well, I very much look forward to reading it. And who's handling the art for you, Garth?
It's a guy I haven't worked with before called Rapha Lobosco. He is, I believe, Italian and living in Ireland. I met him briefly at the New York Con last year. Nice chap. He's quite young, but he's developed a very, very impressive style in quite a short space of time, I think. Great storyteller, great sense of character, really all the things I need from an artist, I like to see in an artist. What I call a sort of nuts and bolts approach.
Yeah.
I'm also very pleased to say, of course, that we have covers by Dave Johnson,
Wonderful.
who's done a fantastic job. I seem to recall issue 3 is a particular corker, but he's done a great job throughout. He did a wonderful job on my Nick Fury book about 10 years ago,
Yeah.
so it's always a pleasure to get work from Dave.
Yeah, as you may recall, I loved that book and was a big fan of it, and I love his work as well. Well, those covers and indeed Garth Ennis's James Bond 007 can all be seen at the links attached to our conversation, where you can also order and pre-order the books. Thanks for joining me, mate. I think you and classic literary Bond is kind of a marriage made in heaven. So I hope we get to do more of them, man.
I hope so too. Pleasure, Andrew.
Yeah.
Cheers.
See you soon, brother. Take care.
You
Bye-bye.
too.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.